Hello, this is my audio-visual presentation on the famous Scottish reformer and theologian, John Knox, quarantine edition. Before I start talking about John Knox's contributions to theology and religion and his work as a reformer, which is all great, I have to bring up something rather important, and that is one fantastic beard. That is amazing. 10 out of 10 Gandalf levels of beard. And I believe it belongs alongside the great beards of history, such as Blackbeard and Kaiser Frederick III. And I bet you weren't expecting me to bring up Kaiser Frederick III in my presentation of John Knox, but I think it's important to talk about the context in which John Knox lived. That was the context of the Protestant Reformation, which was a time in Europe of great change and almost a revolution, where many people, influential people, not only and nobles sought to protest the teachings, protest Protestant, the teachings of the Catholic Church, by first seeking reformation within the Church itself, and when the the church denied this, eventually breaking away. And what they were protesting was basically an abuse of power, where the institution of the Catholic Church very often would abuse their status to gain influence, power, and written money. Often, sometimes even twisting the words of the Bible to do so. And many theologians started to protest this and eventually break away. A famous one shown here is Martin Luther, who would break away from the Catholic Church and create the Lutheran Church. Another famous one is John Calvin, who we will talk about in a little bit. And in England, the English will break away from the Catholic Church under the rulership of King Henry VIII and create the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. And further up north, we have Scotland, which is where John Knox is from. And Scotland, the Protestant Reformation starts to take root, and John Knox is a very early advocate. However, the Protestant Reformation at that time was not popular among the higher-ups in Scotland, the nobility, the kings, so he's eventually forced to live in exile from Scotland. He lives a bit in England, serving actually under King Edward VI, where he actually helps to write the Book of Common Prayer, which was a very influential book in the history of the English Church that helped to unify the teachings and style of worship in England. However, King Edward VI will die at a young age and be replaced by his older sister Mary, also known as Bloody Queen Mary, who is famous for persecuting the Protestants in England and seeking to return to Catholicism. So after she comes into power, John Knox will again flee, this time to Germany. And he'll wander around Germany for a bit, eventually landing in Geneva, where he will meet with John Calvin, the famous reformer. And John Calvin's teachings and theologies are heavily influential on John Knox. And he will take and hold on to these teachings and take them back with him to Scotland, where this time Protestantism is a bit more popular. And he, along with the majority population and several key nobles, will oust the then Queen Mary of Guise, who will be replaced by her daughter, the famous Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, the Queen of Scots, was, however, a Catholic. While the majority of her country was Protestant, she sought to sort of reconcile that and sort of form a middle ground, but constantly butted heads with the teachings of John Knox. John Knox would often preach against Mary, preaching for her abdication of the throne of Scotland. While he was doing this, he, along with several other influential Protestant leaders in Scotland, created what is known as the Scots Confession of 1560, which was basically the founding document of the Church of Scotland, that sought to create this unified Church of Scotland. It passed through Scottish Parliament, but was blocked by Mary, which is probably the biggest reason why John Knox absolutely hated Mary. Uh, Eventually, Mary will be removed from the throne after she's implied for a plot to that implied to the murder of her husband. John Knox will actually advocate for her execution, which he is eventually executed. Uh, and so after that, John Knox continued to preach for a bit until his death. He died not a very wealthy man. And so John Knox is extremely important in not only Scottish history, but British and English history as well, as his efforts to create a Church of Scotland uh, continued the legacy of the influence he had, where the Church of Scotland solidified itself in Scotland and resisted sort of like created a national religious identity of Scotland that continued to persist even after Scotland's became part of the Union of Britain after the Acts of Union, and the Church of Scotland would later be formed into the Presbyterian Church in other parts of the world, where after the British colonized parts of North America and places like Australia, the Presbyterian Church would spread and become a very popular denomination in Protestantism. And fun fact, I am also awful at conclusions.